So, hey all, thank you all for coming. My name is Darin. I'm a product designer at Webflow, working specifically on design systems and interactions/animations, the motion part of the app. I work between San Francisco and Sofia. And I just want to do a quick test so I can know what the audience is like. How many of you are engineers? Not that many. How many of you are designers? I don't know. And how many of you are like PMs or non-designers or engineers? All right. And anyone who doesn't work in tech at all? Yeah, I guess so. Because it's not going to be too useful for other industries, I guess. It's mostly design stuff. OK, so the first half of the talk is going to be not specifically about Webflow, but about the concept we believe in. And in the second part, I'm going to show you some examples of how we have solved different problems we have approached with this problem of direct manipulation. So what does working in production mean? It's a very kind of broad definition, and everyone thinks of it differently, but let's kind of abstract it away from design and tech and anything. What does working in production mean like maybe 500 years ago? This means working on the final thing that reaches your user or customer or whatever. So a painter is creating the picture that the final user is consuming. Like the Mona Lisa that's in the museum right now is the same Mona Lisa Leonardo touched. He didn't describe the Mona Lisa to a painting engineer to build it for him. He actually built the final thing, right? So this is direct manipulation. Basically, everything we do in our day-to-day life and all the different work processes that people have done throughout time have been direct manipulation and production work. This process of describing a facsimile of something to another person who then codes it is very uncommon. It's something we're used to, but not something that's common in other industries. And a huge part of working in production is actually direct manipulation. So direct manipulation is a computer science term specifically, but I don't want to look at it as such. I just want to discuss direct manipulation as something we all understand. So direct manipulation is working with your hands. Direct manipulation is working with visual abstractions. So most of us work with direct manipulation in our tools. We drag stuff, we move stuff. We work with abstractions that resemble how things work in real life. And this is all of the software we use, right? So let's look at some examples of direct manipulation from other industries and other parts of life. This is kind of one of the first documented examples of direct manipulation. I mean, you just put your hand on the rock and blew some dye, and that was it. You didn't have to describe it to another guy who put their hand there. It's simple. You do it yourself. The first tools that cavemen did were directly manipulated. They thought of the idea and they created the actual tool. When we're painting, we are often, as children and as professional painters, as adults, we do paint the final thing. We rarely describe it to another person. Same thing with writing text. No matter if you're writing it on a piece of paper or on a computer, you're writing the final text. You're writing a poem, a song lyric. You're not really writing a wireframe for a song and then giving it to another person. Well, I guess if you're a pop star, maybe. But if you're a real musician, you really aren't. When you're recording music, you're recording the actual vibrations of your guitar or the actual drum beats of your drums. And when you go in studio, you directly manipulate those waves, but they're still there. They still originate from the actual instrument. When you're doing photography, you're capturing the actual photons that you saw right there. And even if you're editing this photo, they still reach in the exact same shape or form the people who are looking at your pictures. And all of these abstractions, we're trying to emulate in software. We have been trying to emulate in software from the 60s. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this talk, it's this guy. I really want you to Google him and to YouTube him and to Wikipedia him after you get home. This is Douglas Engelbart. This is the inventor of the computer mouse, the idea to use a monitor with a computer, the inventor of the first hypertext language. And he did this with one team in the span of 5 years. And if you go on YouTube and you Google the mother of all demos, you can actually watch the announcement of the computer mouse. So this is the father of direct manipulation in computers. And he's the reason we had the first visual interface. Here's the reason we actually decided to connect a television set to a computer instead of printing the results in the 60s. I think he's like the godfather of computer science and human-computer interaction. And this here is the first graphical interface Xerox PARC developed. You can see it's pretty similar to what we're using now. Actually, a lot of the patterns were established there. And it continued on to the Apple Lisa, which is the first kind of mainstream computer that had a mouse and a graphical interface. Then we go to Windows XP, which I guess most of you have used. Not sure what the age here in the audience is, but this was my first memory of really trying to recreate an interface in Photoshop. Then we introduced the iPhone, and again, direct manipulation. You directly manipulate the buttons on the screen. You tilt your phone, and it rotates. Everything you do resembles how it works in real life. And even the design language, as we mentioned, was very, very resemblant of real life back then, even though it's not now. And the latest generation of tooling we are using is even closer to direct manipulation. We are basically getting three-dimensional representations of real-life objects in virtual reality. So direct manipulation is here to stay. Direct manipulation overtook all of our software. And if you think about code, it's one of the few examples of the other approach, which is a command-based language. Like a computer used by normals and even tech people is completely visual. Like every operating system today, every piece of common software we use is completely visual. And let's look at creative software. So we're kind of diving deeper, right? Starting from the caveman and the history of humanity, diving into software, and now going into creative software specifically. So how do these different industries work? Let's look at different examples of creative software, of professional software that's used in production. How do different companies and different professionals use production software to work in production through direct manipulation? A 3D animator models the skeleton of their model visually. It's a very complex tool, right? It's as complex as code, but it's a visual tool. You can see what you're doing, and you can learn it by play. That's very important. A 3D modeler is directly manipulating like the textures and the skin features of this guy right here, just by looking at them, similar to working with clay. They're not writing code-based instructions to do this, not anymore. A cinematic grading artist is working with actual filters they can see in real time. And each and every one of us can understand what's going on here. We might not be grading artists, but we can see what's going on here. A digital artist or a photographer uses Photoshop to directly manipulate their photos. An illustrator creates all the Beziers visually, picks all the colors visually. Basically, everything in Illustrator is visual. A game level designer creates all these beautiful, complex environments visually. A particle effect artist, like creating something like wind or creating something like dust or fire, is also visual. You create these kind of node systems. Everyone's familiar with Photoshop, of course. And print designers in InDesign create magazine layouts visually. Texture artists, you get the point. Video editors, Final Cut Pro, creating movies is completely visual. You have a visual timeline, you have magnetic features, everything resembles real life. And a visual effects artist, of course, works in a similar fashion. So the question is, why haven't we reached this level of direct manipulation in product design and web design? Because the current way to work in production as a designer is to learn to code. There's no other way to do it. Everything else we're doing with other tools is images. So it has to be, basically, whatever you do with it, you have to throw it away eventually and start building it from scratch as an engineer. Everything else we're doing is kind of duct taping the situation, but we're not working in production. And this is why the should designers code thing started, right? The question that a lot of people in Silicon Valley pose is, do you need to learn to code to be able to work alongside engineers in production? Currently, this is the status quo. This is the only way to go. And where are current design tools? Current design tools are great, actually. They're great for ideation and communication. They're great to get your initial idea started. They're great to communicate it with our team members, to get validation from our managers and everything. But when it comes to production, they're not there at all. So we're currently at this phase, right? Where if you are the sender as a designer and your user is the recipient, we still need a trained horse, which is the engineer, and engineer training and everything. So we're still here, And I don't know, I guess most of you do developer handoff. I want to ask you, does it sometimes feel like this? Yeah, I only have one GIF, but I think it's pretty good. So what's the problem here? Let's analyze what's happening here. I mean, the dog is gonna be all right. This is you, the designer, and this is your user or your developer. It doesn't really matter. And the doggy is your project. I mean, the doggy is gonna live. Dogs can swim. I mean, the guy's even laughing. You see that he's happy about missing. It's a fun story, but it's not how you imagined it to be, right? Your design didn't turn out to be just as it was supposed to be on the first go, right? I mean, these guys were trying to catch the dog. The dog's gonna be fine, but this is not what they were trying to do. So what if designers could work in production? What if we make this thought experiment? And at Webflow, we really believe that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. It's a quote by Alan Kay, who is one of the living students of Douglas Engelbart. So he's one of our living connections to the inventor of the mouse. And in Webflow, we're kind of trying to build a very different kind of tool. We're trying to build the first production design tool, a tool that allows you to work alongside engineers in the real environment without being a second-class citizen of the code base. So anything you're doing on the canvas is the final real thing. There's no handoff. There's no translation layer. You're doing the final thing. And designers are shipping websites, prototypes, interfaces directly by hitting the publish button. It's as easy as saving. When you save, your production environment updates. That's it. There's no extra step. So I'm going to show you some examples of different things we've done at Webflow and different demos of how we target the layout, how we do animation, and how we solve different problems which aren't really present in most design tools, like states and animation. So the first one is this demo of how we're doing layout. And as you can see there, everything in Webflow pushes the rest of the objects. So it's following the box model of the web. You don't have to manually move stuff around to change how it's positioned. All the different objects push each other. And here you can see that we're applying different levels of margin to the image, and it's affecting all the different. So if you have 1,000 cards, it's going to affect 1,000 cards because this is CSS classes. This isn't a one-off image of a card. If you want to affect the padding, you can just hold Alt and affect padding on both sides. And again, it's affecting all cards. And to showcase the difference between margin and padding, something that isn't really present in design tools normally, I'm going to make this, I've already made this kind of heading have a little bit of background, so you can see how padding and margin are different. So padding pushes to the inside. And I'm holding Shift here to show you how padding works. So padding pushes content on the inside. And margin pushes content on the outside. And all of layout and all of sizing and layout in Webflow is done through either Flexbox, Grid, or margin and padding. You don't really have to drag things around and move them. They follow a rule-based layout system. And of course, everything here is completely responsive. So as you can see up there, you can go to the small viewports. You can send this link to your phone. This is like a real thing. When you hit the publish button, it's on a live web link you can open on your phone and play with. It's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's no Webflow flavor to it. It's just vanilla, normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can also export it and stop using the tool if you want to and give it to an engineer or work on it in another tool. Here's another example of using Flexbox. I guess those of you who are engineers are familiar with Flexbox. So Webflow is the only design tool that has full production support for Flexbox and CSS Grid. Anything an engineer can do by coding Flexbox, you can do in Webflow. So for instance, this row here is a Flexbox parent. And it's set to horizontal, so the forecasts there are horizontal. And as you can see, you can do alignment based on rules of the parent. So you can say, I want everything in there to align to the bottom or to the top. But you don't have to align the individual items. It's a rule-based system. And as you can see, it's responsive. When you go on a small screen, they stack down. And also, each of those cards is also a Flexbox item that's nested in another Flexbox item. And you can see how you can have a centered layout or a right-aligned layout or a left-aligned layout without moving each individual item. You just change the alignment rule on the parent. And this could affect 10,000 items in your project. It's just as easy to change one instance on 10,000 instances with just using CSS. It's basically how the web works. It's nothing too special about it. We're just basing our layout system on web standards and what the W3C has to provide. Another demo here is working with real data. So if we open up our CMS panel here to the left, this is where you work with data. This is our database sort of tool. And here we're going to create a collection of superheroes right now, which I've already created, of course. Everything's cooked beforehand. And what could a collection of superheroes have? Like, what sort of fields do they have? A superhero has a name, and a superhero has a bio, which should be at least 100 characters. And the superhero should have like an image, an avatar, or some sort of visual representation, right? So currently we're creating a database, actually. This UI is a visual UI for creating SQL relational databases. So we're creating the model for a superhero. They should have a personal website, and let's say a number of movies they were starred in. Like, that should be good. And let's make this required. And the last one we're going to add is a switch, like a Boolean. It's either on or off, and it's active. Is this one active? So currently, is this hero in a movie or not? And that's it. We just created a relational database without any items in it. But as you can see, the model is already there. And next step would be to actually render out these superheroes into our design. So we take the card that we already created, and here's how you tie in your designs to your database visually, completely without using code. So first you connect this field to your superheroes model, and you paste in a card with a placeholder. And as you can see, all of them are the same. This is not what you want to achieve. So now we start connecting the different parts to a database. First, we tell the image to take the image from the database of each character. Then we take the number of movies and render it in this little white thing there. Then we change the heading to use the actual name of the hero from the relational database. Then we select the lorem ipsum kind of paragraph, and we connect it to the bio. And then we can select the button, and we can connect to the actual link. So clicking on either of these will actually go to the page for the hero. This is a part of it, and I'm using it as an example. So let's say we have already designed this card with HTML and CSS, and we want to change its hover behavior. The only thing we have to do is switch to the hover state and change the design. And let's try CSS filters. We have full support for CSS filters. You can do programmatic Gaussian blur. You can do hue rotation, which is pretty interesting. No, this one is brightness, so you can do brightness, but you can also do hue rotation. And if your design only has one color, it's pretty crazy because you can theme the cards. Like the black text stays black and the white card stays white since they have no saturation. But the colorful parts change. And you can animate this as well. So you can go completely bananas if you want to, full-on crazy designs if you want to. You can invert, you can go sepia, you can do anything. And it's just standard CSS filters. So in this case, we want to make it super hyper and make it go invert on hover. But as you can see here, the transition is kind of sudden. And that's not what we want, right? We want to make it gradual, so it kind of animates. And here I'm going to show you our Bezier curve editor. So when you want to change the transition, you can actually drag your own Bezier curve visually. You can use a preset, but you can also go into the Bezier curve. And as you're going to see now, I can drag the handles around and design my own Bezier curves. And honestly, I'm kind of an engineer as well. I do write a bunch of React, and I can't really write the Bezier curves out of my mind just by imagining it. But seeing the actual coordinate system allows me to think of it visually and to design a better Bezier curve. So it's not just easier, but it allows you to have much better results since you're working in a design tool where you see what you're doing. You don't have to imagine it in abstraction first. And another example, actually my last one, is I guess you've all seen this sort of effect, the Apple TV style tilt on hover, where the three-dimensional rotation is based on the user input. So we're going to do this in 1 minute. And I challenge any engineer here to do this in 1 minute with code. Even using a library, I'm fine with that. And yeah, so what we do is select the card, create a new mouse animation, and we have two timelines. First one is for the x-axis, and second one is for the y-axis. So what we want to do basically is when our mouse starts going to the left, imagine this is the card, we want it to start moving to the left, like this. And when it goes to the right, we want it to start moving to the right. It's a very simple interaction, actually. So when we're furthest to the left, we want to rotate it by 16 degrees in three-dimensional space. And when our mouse goes furthest to the right, we want it to be rotated in the opposite direction. So it kind of goes like this on the x-axis. And we do absolutely the same thing on the y-axis. We want it to tilt like this when our mouse is moving up and down. So the 100% state is one extreme, and the 0% state is the other extreme. And we're done, actually. This is the only thing you have to do. If you open it up now, this interaction works. It only took us 1 minute. And this is a real interaction that will work on any browser, in any website. It's not something you give to an engineer and they have to code from scratch. It's the final thing. There's no handoff required here. That's about it. You can follow us on Twitter at Webflow. We also have a huge YouTube channel with a lot of tutorials. And I really advise you to go to webflow.com/university. We believe it's the best resource for not just learning Webflow, but learning the web in general. We have so many people who have learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from scratch just following our free courses. So even if you don't use Webflow, I still recommend them to you. I think they are really, really good and also highly entertaining. Actually, the guy who did the first video that you saw does all of our tutorials, so it's kind of the same sort of cheeky humor in there. And you can follow me personally on Diesel, on Twitter. Yeah, and that's about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Darin. So questions, you know the drill, same thing. If you have a question, we will come close to you and give you a mic.
I don't have gifts. So
maybe next time.
We can have a beer after that.
Someone has a question over there.
Hey, man. Nice presentation. I'm wondering, what's the name of the guy who made the video? It's amazing.
He's called Maguire.
I'll ask you later for the name on
Yeah,
the paper.
it's Maguire.
Mark Wire. Okay.
Maguire. Yeah, it's
Maguire.
hard to pronounce when you're not a native speaker.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I can connect you with him. He's super fun.
Yeah, he looks like.
He also composed
Smart
the
guy.
music for the video, and we had a whole symphonic orchestra record it, actually, so it can match the words. It's crazy stuff, yeah. Yeah? I think there were two people over there.
Okay.
So.
Hello. Well, first of all, it looks great, the product itself.
Thanks.
But my question is, like, how do you approach a problem like user wants some custom behavior that you do not provide out of the box? Is it like some sort of plugin system or?
No, not really. Actually, we have a completely different solution there. Anything that is not in our UI, but is in CSS, you can just write custom code for it. So anything we don't support, you can just open up a code block and write it as CSS, and it works alongside with our tooling. So even if we don't have UI for something, and we do have UI for most of CSS. I mean, we don't have support for small things like first child or last child, but we have like full flexbox support, full grid support, all the typographic properties, basically anything you might need.
Okay, so you can also add like JavaScript there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
You can run any sort of client-side JavaScript, of course. Anything an engineer can write, you can write or paste in Webflow, and it works alongside the rest.
Okay, nice, thanks.
Hi. Do you support also some CSS systems like Bootstrap, some frameworks like this? Can you support them somehow? And second question, I saw that you change things like sizes and paddings and such things. But in this way, how you did it. There was no system in the design. Normally, designers like that. I don't know. All lines are somehow connected. That one is half of the padding or something. So is it possible to give these relations between values of different fields, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about CSS and HTML in general is you're not forced into one way of working. So even though I'm a huge nerd about design systems and I'm super systematic about everything I code and design, you can actually use Webflow in a completely like random way. You don't have to work in a systematic fashion at all. Everything can be a one-off if you want to, and you can be totally non-systematic and play around with stuff as a prototype. Sometimes I personally use it as a prototyping environment, and I don't care too much about the semantics, so I can get an idea out of my head. But sometimes when I'm building production stuff, I'm super careful about my classes and how I use abstractions. So it's performant, and it can be designed by another person in the future, and all the nitty-gritty of engineering, right? So you're not forced into understanding design systems and having to be like a super architect about it. I don't think you are. You can, but you're not forced to.
So the answers are no and no, if I understand it right. You can't use frameworks and import them?
No, you can't really use frameworks. Like the thing is that anything you might need from Bootstrap, you can visually create in around 5 minutes. So we don't see the need for using Bootstrap. You can create the same grid as Bootstrap.
Yeah, but you can just like you use the Bootstrap, what's done in the Bootstrap and reuse the code. So you would have to do it again.
Yeah, but the thing is that like more than 90% of our users are designers, and actually they are mostly the ones who don't want to use a framework like Bootstrap. They want to do the custom thing from scratch, and that's kind of the workflow we're working towards. Because normally you need Bootstrap because you didn't have a designer, right? But if you have a designer, you should settle for something more than Bootstrap, I think. You should settle for a custom. If it's just as easy to build a custom experience, I think you should build a custom experience. At least the way we're suggesting. But you can download Jan's UI kit. Actually, we have a bunch of UI kits that are pretty much Bootstrap level of fidelity, that are Webflow specific and free. So, for instance, Jan has like a Bootstrap that's called the Cards UI kit. Like it's used on huge websites, like on the Stella Artois website, on the Revlon website. It's used by NASA on the launch mission website. So, I'm confident with his UI kit.
Thank you. It's okay. I just wanted to know.
Yeah, it's a workflow we don't really support. You can hack it. I mean, if you download Bootstrap and paste it to our custom code, you can use it. But it's not something I would recommend.
Yeah, it's perfectly clear.
Technically, it's possible.
It's perfectly clear. I just wanted to know if it's possible today.
It's possible technically, but I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi. It was a great presentation and a cool video, really cool video. I got a question connected to the previous one, coding design systems, and many developers, they use, for example, SAS or LAS systems, just to have variables in the CSS code. And maybe isn't it the solution for that kind of problem to get like variables to the most useful, colors and so on to keep the design system like aligned in the project? You got some maybe ideas for the future about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually our color swatches, the UI where you save your global color. What's the term in Sketch? I don't know. The global colors or swatches? Yeah. Actually, they are based on CSS variables under the hood. So when you save a certain red as like red 50 or important red or whatever your semantic is, it actually is saved as a CSS variable in the code base. So you work with, that's kind of a good example of how Webflow works. You work with swatches just in Sketch, but under the hood, you're doing best practices as an engineer. And we're planning to do this for other stuff as well. Like we're going to introduce other sort of variables for spacing, for typography, but the cool part about CSS is anything you do can be a class. So any sort of design decision you make, you can abstract into a class and reuse as a class.
Okay, thanks. Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, coming.
Okay, so right now you can export HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Are you planning to add a feature to export the CMS too and to have the project on our own servers? Because right now, if I'm correct, we need to use to your servers, and that's not so good in some options.
Yeah, you're a user, right? You already use
No,
web-
I'm a designer, but I have servers in Frankfurt, and I want to use my design there because I'm using like more things on one server. And in your option, you have like one server for one project, another server for another project, and if I have like 10 or 20 projects, it will be like very costly in the future.
Yeah, so the code export, you can export the full HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but you can't export the access to our cloud database. So the actual CMS can't really be hosted on a different server because it's completely cloud first. So the moment you create the database, it's saved on Amazon. It's not saved locally. So we don't really have plans for this. We don't have plans to abstract the CMS into a downloadable thing. We think our hosting solution is pretty great. Like, I think it's the best hosting you can get for the price. You get like 40 country CDN. You get more than 90% lighthouse scores. I think it's much better hosting than something like GoDaddy or anything you can buy. Because we have a whole team that's updating and making it better. That's an interesting aspect about Webflow. Maybe you pushed the website 4 years ago, and even if you haven't touched it, this site is more performant today because we improved the performance of all the sites that were created in retrospect. Like if there's a new pattern that makes something faster, you don't have to call your engineer and let them know. Our engineering team is applying these best practices to all sites. So for instance, if you're an engineer and you have to code something, you have to make it browser compatible, right? You have to know all the different hacks around CSS where things break. But in Webflow, you don't have to. We take care of this for you under the hood. So if it looks correct on the canvas, you can expect it to look like this in every browser.
Okay, the last one. Nope.
Anybody? So I guess that's it. Well, thank you, Darin, and thank you, Vu. Please, some applause for both of them. It's really great.